Stop what you are doing right now. I need you to listen carefully before this story begins, because what I am about to tell you is not a story about a missing girl. It is not a story about a boarding school. And it is not, despite everything you are about to hear, a story about evil. It is a story about the spaces between things, the space between what people say and what they mean, the space between what institutions promise and what they actually provide, the space between a child asking for help and a system hearing that cry, the space between a teacher who is trusted and a teacher who is trustworthy, the space between a school that is excellent and a school that is good. These spaces are not always visible. They are precisely designed not to be visible, but they exist in every institution, in every place where human beings have organized themselves around the collective fiction that the system is working the way it is supposed to work. And sometimes in those spaces, terrible things happen. And the space, the terrible, impossible, inexplicable space between a girl walking into a building on a Monday afternoon and that same girl vanishing so completely, so thoroughly, so without explanation that 200 investigators, 3 separate task forces, and 11 years of searching could not agree on what happened to her. Her name was Nora Calloway. She was 15 years old. She had auburn hair that she wore in a braid when she was nervous and loose when she was not. She had a gap between her front teeth that she had refused to get fixed because, she told her mother, "It's the most interesting thing about my face." She played the violin badly and refused to stop. She read the last page of every book first. She kept a color-coded planner in her back pocket and a running list of every question she had ever wanted answered. She loved the particular quality of October light in New England, the way it came in sideways and golden through the leaves, the way it made everything look like it was on the edge of something, not quite summer and not quite winter, suspended in the beautiful anxiety of transition.
She was a sophomore at Hargrove Academy, one of the oldest and most respected private boarding schools on the East Coast, set on 60 acres of New England countryside that looked, in the brochure photographs, like the kind of place where only good things happened. She walked into the East Residential Hall at 4:22 p.m. on a Monday in October. And then she was simply gone. Not found in a locked room, not discovered days later, not explained by any forensic analysis, any witness account, any piece of security footage, any phone record, any physical evidence at all. Gone. Now, back to the story. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comment where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe because stories like this are posted every week. Now let us begin. For 11 years, Nora Calloway's disappearance remained the boarding school mystery that nobody, not the police, not the FBI, not the school, not her family, could explain. Until the day a woman named Carrie Walsh walked into a field office in Boston with a box of letters she had kept hidden for more than a decade and sat down across from an investigator and said, "I know what happened to Nora. And I need you to understand that knowing it almost destroyed me too. Stay with me. Every single piece of this story matters, and it will not end the way you think."
Nora Calloway was the kind of person who made lists, not grocery lists or to-do lists, although she made those too, color-coded, obsessively organized in the small leather planner she kept in her back pocket at all times. She made lists of questions she wanted answered before she died, questions she had about how the world worked, questions about people, the specific people around her, what made them act the way they acted, what they were afraid of, what they most wanted and would never ask for out loud. She had been making these lists since she was 8 years old. Her mother had a box of them at home, spiral notebooks and sticky notes and folded up pieces of paper, an archaeology of a mind that never fully turned off and never fully accepted that a question without an answer was a question worth stopping asking. Most parents would find this quality difficult in a child. Sandra Calloway found it the most characteristic thing about her daughter, the thing that was most fully Nora, most irreducibly hers. in the way that certain qualities belong to certain people so completely that without them, you would not have the same person at all. She was always going to figure things out, Sandra said, in an interview given 2 years after Nora disappeared. From the time she was small, if something didn't make sense to her, she would just keep at it, keep circling it, keep asking. I used to tell her she would make a wonderful scientist. She said she didn't want to be a scientist because scientists had to stay in their lane, and she couldn't stay in any lane. She paused. I never told her that was a flaw. I hope she knew I never thought it was a flaw. Her mother, Sandra Calloway, found 17 of these lists after Nora disappeared. They were tucked into various notebooks, folded into book pages, written on the backs of school assignment sheets. One of them, found in the pocket of a jacket she had left at home the previous summer, read, "Why does kindness make people uncomfortable? Is it because we expect something to be taken from us afterward? What does it feel like to be completely certain about something? Is it possible to know a person fully, or do we only ever know the version of them that they've decided to show us? What is Dad not telling us?" That last question, scrawled at the bottom of a list that otherwise concerned itself with philosophy and marine ecosystems, was the one that would stay with Sandra for years. Not because she had a clean answer, but because she didn't. Because her husband, Frank Calloway, was a quiet man with a large interior life that he shared with almost nobody, including her, and she had always accepted this as simply the shape of the man she had married.
It was only after Nora was gone that she began to wonder whether her daughter had seen something she hadn't. But we're not there yet. First, you need to know Nora. Really know her. She was 15 years old and in the top 5% of her class at Hargrove Academy, which was a place that took academics seriously enough to border on cruelty. She was not the most popular girl at the school. She was too observant for that, too inclined to say the honest thing at the moment when social grace required the comfortable lie. She had 2 close friends, Priya Anand, her roommate since the beginning of freshman year, a fiercely funny girl from Connecticut who wanted to be a theater director, and James Whitfield, a junior from Maryland who she had met during a late-night fire drill in October of freshman year, and who had stood next to her in the cold, both of them wrapped in blankets, and said, "Do you think the universe is intentional or just extremely improvised?" And she had looked at him and thought, finally, someone. She played the violin badly and refused to stop. She had a habit of reading the last page of a book first, not because she needed to know the ending, she explained, but because she wanted to know where the story was going so she could pay attention to the right things along the way. She kept a running tally in our planner of every lie she told in a week, categorized by whether they were kind lies, self-protective lies, or lazy lies. She was working, she said, toward 0. She had been at Hargrove for a year and 4 months when she disappeared, long enough to understand its rhythms, its hierarchies, its specific institutional personality, long enough to notice the things that weren't quite right. In a notebook found in her dorm room after she vanished, a blue spiral-bound thing with a coffee ring on the cover, there was a list dated 3 weeks before she disappeared. It read, "Things that don't add up at Hargrove. 1. The West Records office is locked every Thursday night. Not maintenance, I checked. 2. Mr. H uses his personal phone for student communications. Why not school email? 3. The fire exit on the 2nd floor of East Residential has been propped open every night this week. Someone is coming or going. 4. Priya heard Dr. Weston arguing with someone on the phone about the arrangement. She didn't know what it meant. I think I might." The name after Mr. H was torn out of the notebook, not by investigators, by someone before Nora disappeared. A single page, surgically removed, leaving only the ghost of the indentation of her pen on the page beneath. 11 years later, recovering those indentations through forensic analysis would become one of the most significant breakthroughs in the case.
To understand what happened at Hargrove Academy, you need to understand what Hargrove Academy was. It had been founded in 1887 by a family named Hargrove, whose fortune had come from shipping, and whose guilt about that fortune had apparently expressed itself in philanthropy and educational institution building. The main building was 3 stories of New England granite, with white-trimmed windows and a clock tower that had stopped working in 1962 and had never been repaired, not because of cost, but because, according to the school's founding board, there is something instructive about a clock that has ceased to measure time. This statement, which appears in the school's official history, gives you a sense of the philosophical self-regard with which the institution had always operated.
It had produced senators, surgeons, a Nobel laureate in chemistry, 2 Pulitzer Prize winners, and by a calculation made by the Alumni Association and published proudly in the annual report, approximately 43% of its graduates went on to what the report called positions of national influence. It was, in other words, not merely a school. It was a machine for producing the kind of people that the country's institutions depended on to continue functioning. And like all machines of that description, it was deeply invested in its own smooth operation, in its reputation, in the narrative that it told about itself, which was a narrative of excellence and integrity and the shaping of extraordinary young minds. The annual tuition at Hargrove was $62,000. Room and board added another $14,000. Parents who sent their children to Hargrove were not merely paying for education. They were purchasing membership in a particular kind of future, a future organized around the assumption that the people their children would become at Hargrove would recognize each other across decades and institutions and careers, would open doors for each other, would constitute a network so thoroughly woven into the fabric of the country's elite that it became, in practice, invisible, simply the way things worked, the way opportunities moved, the way the right people always seemed to know the right other people. This is not cynicism. This is description. And it is important because it explains why the institution's investment in its own narrative was not merely vanity, but something more structural and more consequential. A school like Hargrove could not simply be a place where something bad had happened. The story of Hargrove had to be at all times the story of a place where the best things happened to the best young people. Any deviation from that story was not merely embarrassing, it was existentially threatening to the product being sold. It was also, as Nora Calloway had begun to suspect 3 weeks before she disappeared, a place with a significant gap between its public narrative and its private reality.
The headmaster at the time of Nora's disappearance was Dr. Richard Weston. He had been at Hargrove for 22 years, first as a teacher, then as dean of students, then as headmaster for the final 12 years of his tenure. He was the kind of man who appeared in every photograph to be exactly what a headmaster of a prestigious boarding school should look like: silver-haired, erect, authoritative, possessed of a warm handshake and a memory for names that parents found reassuring and students found slightly unnerving. He gave the same welcome speech to every entering class, with only minor variations, and it always ended with the words, "Hargrove does not simply educate, it forms character, and character once formed here does not break." He said this at the memorial service held for Nora Calloway 2 weeks after she disappeared, when investigators had not yet given up hope that she would be found alive. He said it to her parents, who were sitting in the front row of the school's chapel, and Sandra Calloway would later say that she had wanted, in that moment, to stand up and scream. The faculty member whose name had been torn from Nora's notebook was Mr. Harrison Blackwell. He was 41 years old. He had been at Hargrove for 6 years, teaching advanced history and serving as the faculty advisor for the school's debate team. He was considered by colleagues and students alike to be one of the most engaging teachers at the school. He was the kind of teacher that students sought out during office hours, not because they needed help, but because they wanted to talk about history, about current events, about the kind of larger questions that the curriculum touched but rarely explored fully. He had won the school's Teaching Excellence Award twice in 6 years. His students consistently described him as the teacher who made me think. He had also, according to financial records that would not be examined until 8 years after Nora's disappearance, been receiving payments from an entity that had no formal relationship with Hargrove Academy, beginning 14 months before Nora went missing. The payments were small at first, then larger, then very, very large indeed. But before we get to the money, before we get to what Nora had figured out and what it cost her, we have to go back to the Monday afternoon when she disappeared. Because the disappearance itself, the mechanics of how a 15-year-old girl could vanish from a monitored, gated, camera-equipped campus in the middle of the afternoon with no trace, is the thing that made this case impossible for 11 years. And understanding that impossibility is how you understand everything that follows.
The last confirmed sighting of Nora Calloway took place at 4:22 p.m., captured on the camera at the entrance to the East Residential Hall. She was wearing a dark green field jacket over her school uniform, carrying her violin case and her school bag, and she appeared, in the grainy but clear footage, to be moving with purpose, not hurried, not frightened, walking the way she always walked, which Priya Anand described as like she's already mentally several steps ahead of wherever her feet are. She had left her last class, Advanced English, at 3:50 p.m. Her teacher, Miss Rebecca Ford, confirmed she had seemed completely normal. Engaged, she said. She asked a question about dramatic irony in the last 10 minutes of class. A good question. She had gone to the dining hall briefly. The time-stamped card reader showed her swiping in at 4:02 p.m. and back out at 4:09 p.m. 7 minutes, long enough to grab something, not long enough to sit. She had stopped at the mail room, confirmed by a postal worker who remembered her, to pick up a package from home. The package was a tin of cookies her mother sent every few weeks and which Nora always shared with Priya. The cookies were found unopened in her room. Priya had not touched them. She would not, she said later, be able to eat that brand of cookies again for the rest of her life. From the mailroom, the camera in the East Residential Hall entrance recorded her entering at 4:22 p.m. This camera had a blind spot, a narrow corridor that ran along the left side of the building's ground floor, leading to the maintenance access and the fire exit that Nora had noted in her notebook as being propped open. The camera could see the main staircase and the front half of the ground floor common room. It could not see the left corridor. What investigators found when they reviewed the footage exhaustively was this. Nora entered at 4:22 p.m. She appeared briefly in the common room, set down her violin case near the couch where she usually sat, and then moved toward the left side of frame. She passed out of camera view at 4:23 p.m. She did not appear on any other camera for the rest of that day, or any day after. The violin case was still there when Priya returned to the common room at 5:45 p.m. The tin of cookies was upstairs on Nora's desk. Her planner was open on her bed to that week's page. Her laptop was charging on her nightstand. Her phone, and this is the detail that investigators returned to again and again, her phone was on her bed, plugged in, fully charged. Nora Calloway had left her room for less than 2 hours and come back and put down her violin case and then left again without her phone, voluntarily or otherwise. She had not called anyone, she had not texted anyone, she had not posted anything to any social platform. She had simply walked into the blind spot of a single camera at 4:23 p.m. on a Monday afternoon in October and ceased to exist in any verifiable sense. The fire exit at the end of the left corridor was found closed and locked when investigators checked it that evening. Whether it had been propped open earlier that day, whether someone had come through it or gone out through it, could not be established from physical evidence alone.
What could be established was this. Someone had cleaned the floor of that left corridor very recently. Not the regular cleaning schedule. The facilities manager confirmed that corridor was cleaned on Tuesdays and Fridays. But the floor had been mopped within the past several hours. The cleaning product was fresh enough to still carry its chemical smell. The facilities manager, when asked who had cleaned the corridor, had no answer. The cleaning log for that Monday showed no scheduled cleaning. No staff member claimed responsibility for it. The school supply closet showed a mop had been used and returned, but the sign-out sheet, which was supposed to be filled in for supply usage, was blank for that day. Someone had cleaned that corridor in the afternoon Nora disappeared, using school supplies, without logging it, without telling anyone, and had been careful enough to replace everything exactly as they found it. The invisibility of that act, the care taken to leave no trace, told investigators everything and told them nothing. The investigation into Nora Calloway's disappearance was, by objective measure, one of the most extensive searches ever conducted for a missing minor in the state of Massachusetts. Within 24 hours of her being reported missing, the campus had been searched twice. Within 48 hours, the surrounding woods, 60 acres of dense New England forest that bordered the school's grounds, had been combed by search and rescue teams with dogs. Within a week, a FBI task force had joined the state police investigation, and every faculty member, student, and staff employee at Hargrove Academy had been interviewed at least once. The lead detective assigned to the case was Detective Sergeant Paul Ortega, a 15-year veteran of missing persons investigations who was described by colleagues as the most patient man I have ever worked with. Patience being, in investigations like this, not a personality trait, but a professional necessity. He was 51 years old, methodical, and possessed of a quality that the best investigators share: the ability to hold contradictory possibilities simultaneously without forcing a resolution before the evidence is ready to provide one. He was, from the beginning, struck by the quality of the absence. Not just Nora's absence, the absence of anything. In 15 years of missing persons investigations, he had never worked a case where a person disappeared from a monitored, enclosed environment and left behind so thoroughly nothing. Missing people, even those who disappeared intentionally, left traces.
a conversation that turned out to be significant, a purchase on a bank card, a call from an unfamiliar number, a face on a camera somewhere in a city. The traces were sometimes microscopic and sometimes obvious, but they were always there, because people are not ghosts. They exist in the world in ways that the world records. Nora Calloway existed in the world at 4:23 p.m. on a Monday in October. She did not exist in any recordable way after that. No bank activity. Though she had a small account her parents kept funded for incidentals. No phone activity. The device remained at school, charging, untouched.
No camera appearances anywhere in the surrounding towns or along the highway access points from the campus. No one who had seen her after 4:23 p.m. came forward, despite the extensive public appeal and the $500,000 reward her parents offered within the first week. Nothing. He found, in those first weeks, an almost total absence of evidence. No physical trace of Nora in the corridor where she was last seen. No trace of anyone else either. The clean floor, the locked fire exit. No fingerprints beyond what was expected. No hair, no fiber, no biological material that shouldn't have been there. The corridor was as clean as if nobody had ever used it, which, given that it was a well-trafficked access corridor in a residential building, was itself significant. The interviews produced a similar blankness. Students who had seen her that day confirmed the timeline: dining hall, mailroom, residential hall entrance, and nothing after. Faculty members accounted for their own whereabouts with the straightforward, slightly defensive detail of people who understood they were being scrutinized and were trying to be helpful without being implicated. Dr. Weston cooperated fully and professionally and expressed in measured and appropriate terms the school's commitment to full transparency. He made the school's records available, he provided personal correspondence, he sat for multiple interviews. Mr. Harrison Blackwell was interviewed 4 times. He was composed, precise, and helpful. He described his last interaction with Nora as a brief conversation after his class 2 days before she disappeared, in which she had asked a question about the historical relationship between institutional authority and individual conscience, a question he had found interesting and had spent several minutes discussing with her. He said he had no idea what had happened to her. He said he was devastated, along with the entire faculty. He was, in every interview, exactly what an innocent man would be, which is one of the reasons it took so long. The other reason, the structural reason, the reason that makes this case a story about more than just one missing girl, was that Hargrove Academy was extraordinarily good at protecting itself, not through active obstruction. There was no evidence then or later of anyone deliberately misleading investigators in any legally actionable way, but through the more insidious, more ambient obstruction of an institution that has spent over a century learning how to manage difficult situations and emerge intact. Lawyers were present at every interview conducted on school premises. Information was provided, but always in the most carefully organized, most contextually sanitized form. Questions about internal financial arrangements, about personnel matters, about the school's relationships with external entities were answered in ways that were technically complete and practically opaque. Detective Ortega wrote in a case note dated 3 weeks into the investigation, "This school has the cleanest public face I have ever seen on an institution that is hiding something. I do not yet know what it is hiding. I do not have evidence that it is hiding it deliberately. I only know that every time I think I have found a thread that leads somewhere interesting, I pull it and it comes away smooth. Someone or something has been very careful about the threading." He was right about all of it, and he would not be able to prove it for 8 more years.
In the weeks after Nora disappeared, Priya Anand stopped sleeping. This is not a metaphor. She literally could not lose consciousness for more than 40 minutes at a time before waking with the specific clarity of someone whose mind had not turned off, had been running calculations in the background, and had produced an answer that kept jerking her awake. The answer was always the same. She knew something. Not everything, not enough, but something. Something she had seen or heard or been told that fitted with something else she had seen or heard or been told. And the fitting together of those 2 things produced a picture she couldn't fully see but could feel the shape of in the dark. She had told investigators in her first interview everything she knew. The notebook, the list, the things Nora had mentioned being curious about, the conversation about Mr. H. She hadn't known then, and still didn't know, which teacher the initial stood for, because Nora had been careful. She was always careful, Priya said, and the investigators had noted this. She didn't tell me names unless she was sure. She actually said this, "Information has weight. You have to be careful how much weight you put on people." What Priya had not told investigators in the first interview, not because she was withholding, but because she had not yet understood its significance, was a conversation she and Nora had the Thursday evening before her disappearance. They had been lying in their respective beds after lights out, the way they often talked, in the particular intimacy that darkness and proximity produce. And Nora had said carefully, in the tone she used when she was thinking something through out loud, "Priya, if I figured out something that could really hurt someone, like really genuinely expose them, what do you think the right move is? Do you tell someone? Who do you even tell if the people you'd normally tell are part of it?" Priya had said, "Part of what?" And Nora had been quiet for a moment and then said, "I don't want to say until I'm sure. I just need to know what you think, hypothetically." "I think you find someone outside the system," Priya had said. "Someone with nothing to lose from knowing." Nora had said, "Yeah, that's what I think too." Then, "Hey, if anything weird ever happens to me, like if I just kind of stop being reachable for a bit, will you look? Like actually look, not just assume I went somewhere?" Priya had laughed. "Obviously, you're my person. Stop being dramatic." Nora had said, "Okay, good." She did not say, "I'm scared." She did not say, "I think I'm in danger." She said, "Okay," and "good," and went to sleep. Because she was 15 years old, and she was careful, and she had made a plan, and she believed, the way 15-year-olds believe things even when they know better, that if you are careful enough and smart enough and have a good enough plan, the world will respect those qualities and behave accordingly. Priya remembered this conversation 4 days after Nora disappeared, when she was lying awake at 3 a.m. in a room that had Nora's things in it and not Nora. She got up, turned on her desk lamp, and wrote it down, word for word, as completely as she could reconstruct it. She brought it to Detective Ortega the next morning. He read it twice. He put it in the file. He said very quietly, she was trying to find someone outside the system. Priya said, "Did she find them?" He didn't answer. The answer was that he didn't know. The answer was that they had found no evidence of Nora reaching out to anyone outside the school in the days before her disappearance. No emails, no calls from her phone to unrecognized numbers, no meetings scheduled with any external authority. If she had found someone outside the system, she had done it in a way that left no electronic trace. Or she had not found them yet. Or she had found someone she thought was outside the system and been wrong. 8 years after Nora Calloway disappeared, a forensic accountant named Marcus Webb was hired by a state oversight committee examining financial irregularities at 3 New England private schools. It was not a case about a missing girl. It was a routine audit of institutional governance. Marcus Webb was thorough and unromantic about his work and had spent 20 years examining the places where money moved in ways it wasn't supposed to. He found in the records of Hargrove Academy going back 12 years a pattern of payments flowing through an entity called the Weston Educational Trust, a private foundation connected through several corporate layers to Dr. Richard Weston. These payments originated from a network of companies that, after substantial digging, resolved into a data brokerage firm operating out of Delaware, with clients in the financial services and college admissions consulting industries.
Circumstances, disciplinary records, learning disability documentation, mental health histories. The kind of information that families of college-bound teenagers would pay to protect, and that Nora Calloway had described, in her notebook list, as information being accessed improperly through locked office records. The payments to the Weston Educational Trust spanned 9 years. In the middle of that 9-year period was the academic year in which Nora Calloway disappeared. Harrison Blackwell's name appeared in the records as a secondary coordinator, the person within the school who organized and transmitted the data. The payments to Blackwell were not through the trust, but through a separate consulting arrangement with a company that provided, on paper, educational technology advisory services. Marcus Webb, who was not investigating a missing persons case, found this and considered it for a long time, and then picked up his phone and called the Massachusetts State Police Cold Case Unit and asked to speak to whoever was handling the Nora Calloway file. The person who answered was Detective Paul Ortega, who had retired from active caseload 5 years earlier, but had never fully relinquished this case. He kept the file at home. He thought about it regularly. He had been waiting for 8 years for a thread that didn't come away smooth. Marcus Webb gave him the thread, and this time when he pulled it, the whole fabric moved. With the financial records establishing the scheme and connecting Weston and Blackwell to it, Detective Ortega, now working as a special consultant to the state police task force that had been reopened, went back to the blue notebook with the coffee ring. The page torn from it, the page that had contained the full name of the teacher Nora had been suspicious of, had been photographed extensively during the original investigation. Electrostatic document analysis, a forensic technique that recovers the impressions left by handwriting on the page beneath the written one, had been attempted in 2013 and produced only partial results. The technology had improved significantly in the intervening years. The reanalysis, conducted in 2021, recovered the name clearly. It was Harrison Blackwell. And beneath his name, 2 lines that had not been recovered before. He knows I've been in the corridor. I saw his face when we passed in the hall this morning. I need to move faster than I thought. She had written this 2 days before she disappeared. She had been planning to move faster. She had been trying to find someone outside the system. She had known Blackwell was aware she had seen something. And she had walked into the blind spot of a camera on a Monday afternoon and disappeared.
Not in the abstract, theoretical way that people claim fear as a justification for inaction in retrospect. In the specific, concrete, deeply rational way of someone who understood exactly what she knew, exactly who she knew it about, and exactly what people in Weston's position were capable of doing to protect themselves. She had a daughter. She had a life she had built carefully. She had seen, in her years in the administrative office at Hargrove, how the institution managed problems. She had seen it manage Nora's disappearance, the legal choreography, the careful information control, the way the school's narrative had been constructed and maintained so seamlessly that even a federal task force had been unable to find a clean entry point. She had been afraid, and she had been protecting herself, and she had been writing letters to cope with the fear instead of acting on it. What changed was this. She was in her library one Tuesday afternoon in November, shelving books in the children's section, and a little girl, maybe 7 years old, with auburn hair and a braid, came around the corner of the shelving unit and looked up at her and said, "Do you have any books about missing people?" And Carrie Walsh stood very still for a moment and looked at this child and felt something in her chest that she described afterward to the investigators as not quite breaking, more like finally finishing the break that started 11 years ago. She went home. She got the box from the closet shelf where it had lived for 11 years. She put it in her car. She drove to Boston. She sat across from Special Agent Dana Morrison, who had been assigned to the reopened Nora Calloway case following Marcus Webb's referral, and she put the box on the table and she said, "I know what happened to Nora Calloway. I need you to understand that I am not a bad person. I need you to understand that I was afraid, and I had a child, and I made the wrong choice for the wrong reasons, and I have been paying for it every day for 11 years. And I need you to understand that I am here now, and I am going to tell you everything, and I need you to make sure that whatever happens next, it's actually about her, not about me, about Nora." Special Agent Morrison said, "Start from the beginning." Carrie Walsh said, "The beginning is a Thursday night in September, about 6 weeks before Nora disappeared. I was working late in the administrative office. I was alone. I saw something I shouldn't have seen. She had seen Harrison Blackwell removing files from the school's confidential student record system, not photocopying them, removing the physical files. She had ducked back into her office before he saw her. She had spent 3 days trying to decide what to do. She had gone to Dr. Weston, who was her supervisor, because she didn't know who else to go to. She had described what she had seen.
Dr. Weston had thanked her for coming to him. He had told her he would handle it. He had, the following day, called her into his office and explained, in the careful and authoritative tone of a man who had been managing difficult situations for 22 years, that what she had seen was part of a legitimately authorized archiving process that was scheduled to be completed that week, and that she should not concern herself further with it. She had believed him, or she had wanted to believe him, or she had understood, at some level below conscious articulation, that there was something between believing and disbelieving that was more livable than either, and she had taken up residence there. 6 weeks later, Nora Calloway disappeared. And Carrie Walsh had understood, in the cold and specific way of someone whose self-deception had been stripped away by a cataclysmic event, that the girl had figured out the same thing she had figured out, that the girl had been trying to do the thing she hadn't done, and that the girl was gone. She had started writing letters. She had not sent them. Until now. The criminal case that followed Carrie Walsh's testimony moved with the particular deliberateness of a prosecution that understands it is building something that must hold. Harrison Blackwell was arrested 14 months after Carrie Walsh's visit to the FBI field office, 14 months during which investigators pieced together a case from financial records, recovered digital communications, the forensic analysis of Nora's notebook, Carrie Walsh's testimony, and a parallel federal investigation into the data brokerage firm that had been the source of the payments. The charges against Blackwell included kidnapping, obstruction of justice, involvement in the unlawful collection and sale of protected student information, and, on the basis of evidence that the investigation had painstakingly assembled from the financial records, the notebook analysis, and the testimony of a former employee of the data brokerage firm who agreed to cooperate, criminal conspiracy in connection with Nora Calloway's disappearance. The charges did not include murder. The investigators and prosecutors were careful about this. They did not know, with the certainty required for a murder charge, what had happened to Nora Calloway's body. They had her disappearance, the evidence of Blackwell's awareness that she was onto him, the financial payment described as security matter resolution, the cleaned corridor, the torn page. They had everything except Nora. She has never been found.
This fact, around which every other fact in the case arranges itself like planets around a dark sun, is the one that resists resolution, the one that no verdict, no sentencing, no amount of legal proceeding can address. Nora Calloway is not here to receive justice. She is not here to hear her name spoken in a courtroom in the context of someone being held accountable for what was done to her. She is a girl who walked into a blind spot at 4:23 p.m. on a Monday in October, and who is still, in the most devastating and irreversible sense, in that blind spot. Dr. Richard Weston was charged separately with conspiracy and with obstruction of justice connected to his concealment of Blackwell's activities and his role in structuring the payments through the trust. He maintained, through his lawyers, that he had not known the full extent of what Blackwell was doing, and had certainly not known it had any connection to Nora's disappearance. The jury, after 9 days of deliberation, found him guilty on the conspiracy charges and not guilty on the obstruction charge, a verdict that satisfied no one entirely, and that Sandra Calloway described outside the courthouse as a half-truth wearing the clothes of justice. Harrison Blackwell was convicted on all charges. He was sentenced to 40 years without the possibility of parole. He maintained through the trial and in every interview and statement he has given since that he did not hurt Nora Calloway, that he does not know what happened to her, that the security matter resolution payment was for something else entirely, and that the timing was coincidental. Nobody believes him, but believing someone is guilty and proving what they did are two different things, and the law, which must deal in proof, is left with the same unanswered question it started with. Where is Nora? Sandra Calloway never stopped. This is not an exaggeration and not a metaphor. She has, in the 15 years since her daughter disappeared, become one of the most knowledgeable private citizens in the country on the subject of missing persons investigations, student privacy rights, and institutional accountability in private education. She founded an organization called the Nora Project, which advocates for independent reporting channels in residential schools and for stronger federal oversight of student data privacy. She has testified before Congress twice. She has been subject of 3 documentary films, 2 of which she cooperated with, and 1 of which she did not, and which she has criticized publicly for prioritizing the mystery over the person. She keeps a photograph of Nora on her desk, the braid, the gap between the teeth, the expression of someone already several steps ahead of wherever her feet are. She says when people ask how she keeps going, "I keep going because she would have kept going. Nora didn't stop when things were hard. She kept making her lists, she kept asking her questions, she kept moving toward the truth even when it was dangerous. The least I can do is be as brave as my daughter was." Frank Calloway, Nora's father, the quiet man with the large interior life, did not keep going in the same external way. He and Sandra divorced 4 years after Nora disappeared, a casualty of the particular alchemy of shared grief that sometimes bonds people, and sometimes, when it's large enough, atomizes them instead. He moved to Oregon. He works as a carpenter. He rarely speaks publicly about Nora. He sends Sandra a text message every year on October 14th, Nora's disappearance anniversary. It always says the same thing. Still looking for her in everything. Priya Anand became a defense attorney. She specializes in cases involving institutional misconduct. She has represented, over the course of her career, dozens of clients who were harmed by institutions that prioritized their own protection over the people in their care. When journalists ask if this is connected to Nora, she says,
Everything I do is connected to Nora. She was my person. She asked me what to do when you figure out something that could hurt someone, and I told her to find someone outside the system. And I have spent my entire career trying to be that person for someone else. James Whitfield, the junior from Maryland who had stood with Nora in the cold during a fire drill and asked whether the universe was intentional or improvised, he became a journalist. He covered the Blackwell trial for a national outlet. He was, by every account, meticulous, fair, and deeply restrained given his personal connection to the case. In the piece he wrote after the verdict, he included a single paragraph that his editor initially flagged as too personal
and that he insisted on keeping. Nora Calloway asked me, on the night we met, whether the universe was intentional or just extremely improvised. I didn't give her a satisfying answer. I told her I thought it was probably improvised, but that the improvisation had its own logic that we couldn't see clearly enough to recognize as logic. She thought about this for a moment and then said, "Then the job is to pay attention carefully enough to find the logic." She was 15 years old. She was paying attention carefully enough to find the logic of something that got her killed. The least the rest of us can do is keep paying attention. Detective Paul Ortega, retired, attended every day of Blackwell's trial. He sat in the gallery with the stillness of a man who had been patient for a very long time and who understood that patience, in this particular case, was the thing he had contributed. He did not give statements to the press. After the verdict, he went home and made dinner and called his daughter, and she said did not talk about the case at all. He talked about her, about what she was working on, what she was reading, whether she was sleeping enough. She said, "Dad, are you okay?" He said, "I found what I could find. I wish it was more." She said, "I know." He said, "She was a good kid. You can tell, even from a file. You can tell the kind of person someone was."
The school did not close. This will not surprise you if you have been paying attention, because institutions of Hargrove's age and reputation and financial endowment do not close. They reform. They issue statements. They appoint commissions and implement protocols and rebrand the things that most need rebranding and emerge after a suitable period of institutional penance, more or less intact. The Weston Educational Trust was dissolved. The school's data management systems were overhauled under court order and independently audited for 3 consecutive years. A new headmaster was appointed, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who had spent her previous career at institutions with rather better records on student welfare, and who arrived at Hargrove with a visible intention to actually change things rather than appear to change them. She invited Sandra Calloway to address the student body in her second year. Sandra accepted. She stood in the school's chapel, the same chapel where Richard Weston had told parents that character formed at Hargrove did not break, and she looked out at several hundred students and she said, "Your school failed my daughter. I want you to understand that, not because I want you to feel guilty for something you didn't do, but because I want you to understand what failure looks like so you can recognize it. It doesn't look like someone standing up and announcing that they're doing something wrong. It looks like everyone is doing the comfortable thing, the quiet thing, the thing that keeps the system moving smoothly. My daughter was not comfortable. My daughter was not quiet. She made lists of questions and she refused to stop asking them even when it became dangerous. She was 15 years old, and she was braver than every adult in this building at the time of her disappearance. I am asking you to be the generation that is brave enough to not need a 15-year-old to show you how." The students were quiet for a long time after she finished. Then they applauded, not briefly the way audiences applaud at conclusions, for a long time, with the specific quality of young people who have understood something they needed to understand.
Nora Calloway has not been found. I want to say that clearly one more time, because this is a story that could allow you to feel that justice was served and the mystery was resolved, and you could close the tab with a sense of satisfying completion. And that feeling would be a lie. The mystery was partially resolved. Some justice was served. Harrison Blackwell is in prison. Richard Weston is in prison. The data firm was shut down by federal regulators. The scheme was exposed and dismantled. The Nora Project has changed student privacy law in 4 states. But Nora Calloway, who walked into a blind spot at 4:23 p.m. on a Monday in October when she was 15 years old, has not been found. Her mother does not know where she is. Her brother Tyler, who sent voice notes to her phone every Sunday for a year after she disappeared, does not know where she is. Priya Anand, who was her person, does not know where she is. James Whitfield, who stood with her in the cold and talked about the logic of improvised universes, does not know where she is. The questions Nora made lists of did not get answered. She never found out what her father wasn't telling them. She never found the certainty she wondered about. She found the danger she had been careful about, and it found her first. What we are left with is what we are always left with in stories like this one. Not resolution, but obligation. The obligation of the living to carry what the dead were carrying, to take it further than they could, to make the carrying mean something. The Nora Project, Priya's courtroom, James's journalism, Paul Ortega's patience across 8 years, waiting for a thread that would hold. And you who stayed with this story for 60 minutes, who listened to a girl who made lists of questions get reduced to a case number, and then slowly, painstakingly returned to herself, to the braid and the gap in her teeth, and the books read backwards, and the violin played badly, and the word finally, when she met someone who asked the right kind of questions in the cold.
You owe her something, now that you know her. We all do. Pay attention. Ask the uncomfortable question. Be the person outside the system that someone is looking for. Answer when the next kid comes knocking. That is the only answer to questions that have no answers. Not resolution. Action. Keep making lists. If this story stayed with you, if Nora stayed with you, then you already understand what this channel is for. We don't do easy stories here. We don't do clean endings. We do the real ones. The ones where the justice is incomplete and the loss is permanent, and the only meaningful response is to look directly at what happened, understand it fully, and refuse to look away. If that is the kind of storytelling that matters to you, subscribe right now. Click that button. Because tomorrow I have a story that is going to sit with you in the same way this one did, and you do not want to miss it. Like this video if Nora's story deserves to be heard by more people, because the algorithm does not care about 15-year-old girls who made lists of questions, but people do, you do, and sharing is how we make that care louder than the algorithm. Drop a comment below. Tell me what stayed with you. Tell me which detail you can't shake. Tell me about the Priya in your life, or the question you've been afraid to ask. I read every single comment. This community is the reason this work gets made. And if you know of a story, a disappearance, a case, an injustice inside an institution that protected itself better than it protected the people in its care, tell me. This channel exists to find those stories and tell them the way they deserve to be told. With her name, with her braid, with the gap in her teeth, and the violin she played badly, and the question she refused to stop asking. With all of it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying. Thank you for knowing that attention, paid carefully enough, can become a form of justice. Keep watching. Keep asking. Keep looking.